not have the same regulatory structure.
So we definitely support these efforts to create a regulatory framework around stablecoins. Stablecoins may have a big future with consumers and businesses. We can't know that now, but it is important for the development of stablecoins in a safe and sound manner, and a manner that protects consumers and savers and all, that there be a regulatory framework. So we see these bills, and we're in contact as we were in the last Congress, and trying to add our technical thoughts and how to do this. And we think it's a very constructive exercise.
Well, we do think, you have a lot of expertise in this session, and there are people people come with lots of opinions on everything in crypto, from over the top to the other end of the spectrum. And I'm going to need to rely on your expertise as well as we try to work through some framework for stable coins. I know there are a lot of earlier questions on CFPB. I think the record is pretty darn good. It's returned $20 billion to consumers. Matter of fact, the last time we had the previous chair here, Chair Rohit, Mr. Chopra, we were talking about $55 million to Virginians. I do have to mention this more for my colleagues. Tim Kaine and I did a teletown hall last night. Lots of things happening in Virginia. Normally we would get maybe 3,000, 5,000, 6,000 folks on a teletown hall. We had 60,000 last night. I have not seen anything like that in my time up on here on the Hill, and a huge amount of concern about what the Doge boys are doing, whether our information is safe, whether privacy is protected. I had one lady say, in light of what was happening at CFPB, and while there's not a direct connection, she's saying, is her deposits at her bank safe? We tried to give her a assurance, but I said, you know what, ma'am, I'm going to be talking to the chairman of the Federal Reserve tomorrow. And with this diminution or shuttering, at least at the time being, of the CFPB, can I tell, I believe her name was Mary, can I tell Mary from Virginia that her bank account is safe?
I think bank accounts overall across the economy are safe, yes. We've still got deposit insurance at the FDIC, and the banking system is well capitalized and safe.
Well, again, I think the concern was being raised was that the diminution of consumer protections lent her concerns about whether that dollar being safe. Last thing I want to recognize is that there's been reports in the media about the thinness in the Treasury markets, the number of additional bonding that we're going to have to do, particularly with so many of these unpaid tax cuts. Matter of fact, one of the things that was really striking to me was that yesterday the president mentioned how he was, quote, examining Treasury debt payments for possible fraud, and suggested that our debt might not be as high as possible. We all understand the full faith and credit of the United States is based upon a reputation. If this president were to suddenly say, I'm wiping off X amount of debt because I don't believe we owe it, what kind of effect would that have on both stability of the dollar and the overstability of our economy?
It will probably not surprise you that I will defer to you on that question.
So you think it would be, from a Fed standpoint, the President of the United States starts to saying we're not going to pay our Treasury debt, you're going to have no view at all?
I'm not going to comment on things that the President says.
I would like to see us at some point get a stronger answer on that, because I think that in light of the President's willingness to shut down agencies willy-nilly, his ability to potentially curtail payment of debt, I think would have devastating consequences on our economy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Britt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, there's been a lot of conversation both in and out of this hearing room today. Conversations about a co-president referencing Elon Musk, referencing the work that Doge is doing. I think it's important to remember that President Trump ran on this. I mean, he said, we're going to look for wasteful spending across our government. We're $36 trillion in debt, y'all. That's not only fiscally irresponsible, it is actually morally irresponsible. And the difference in this administration and the last administration is that President Trump is actually the final arbiter. And it's interesting that none of you had anything to say over the last 4 years when it is clear that our commander-in-chief was not in command. And if we're going to use the term co-president, then let's go back and say co-president Jake Sullivan, co-president Ron Klain, co-president Jill Biden. I mean, it seems that some of the biggest decisions were made during the president's afternoon nap time. And so I just think we need to be a little bit more honest about what's been laid out and what's actually occurring. Chair Powell, I want to discuss some monetary policy issues, but I first want to highlight a few supervisory items. We unfortunately started 2023 with several bank failures in which the Fed itself admits its supervisors were, quote, too slow to ask. The question has been asked earlier about who was fired, who was not. I think that there's some real merit to having accountability that we have not seen there. In the aftermath of those failures, the Fed was certainly not slow to act when it came to new regulations, like the new capital requirements that would have put the U.S. banks at a global disadvantage and actually hurt consumers in my state. The way I look at this is the world came up with a gold standard, and then Vice Chair Barr said, hold my beer. And unfortunately, that hurts Alabamians. In addition to that, we had Community Reinvestment Act and stress testing frameworks that were basically adopted in secret. Or as we discussed last week, the reputational risk and just the arbitrary nature of that and those standards that were used to push political agendas. None of this is acceptable, and we've got to take a look at how to promote greater accountability and transparency into the Fed's supervisory function. Shifting gears, as of January 30th, the Federal Reserve had a mark-to-market loss on its balance sheet of roughly $221 billion. In fact, I looked back and the Fed has posted losses since September of 2022. Meanwhile, we've seen transfers to the CFPB totaling $2 billion since September of 2022. So just to clarify, Chair Powell, these money transfers are requested by the CFPB director each quarter and then directly deposited by the Fed. Is that how that works?
So the director of the CFPB requests money, and we, under the law, we send that money. Yes.
So, in fact, but Dodd-Frank actually prohibits the Fed from actually reviewing or amending those requests.
That is correct.
And so it gives full discretion to the CFPB
up
director.
to, I think, 12% of our, there's a ceiling on that, but that's correct.
So just to level set, how many times, has the CFPB funding request been denied by the Fed?
We don't have the authority
Zero.
to deny it under the law.
Zero, right?
Zero, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And by the way, I'd like to applaud the current administration and acting director Vogt for inserting some accountability back into the agency by pausing these quarterly just blank checks. On that, I know there's been a lot of conversation around the Bureau over the last few days, but I do want to focus on those last couple of years, particularly the $2 billion the CFPB received from September 2022 up to the last receipt on January 2nd, 2025. Congress specified in statute that the Fed shall fund the CFPB through the combined earnings of the Federal Reserve System. However, as I mentioned, the Fed has no current earnings. It has a balance sheet of negative $200 billion. So instead of the recent audit statement saying the Fed is funding the CFPB through assessments on its reserve banks, Mr. Chair, there are only two statutes that authorize the Fed to make reserve bank assessments, and neither permit the CFPB to fund transfers. So what authority exactly did the Federal Reserve have to assess the reserve banks in this manner over the last 2 years? I just wanted kind of a fact-finding.
We looked at that question very carefully, and it's very clear on the law and the legislative history that we're still required to make those payments to do so.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would point out that candidate Trump did not run on implementing Project 2025. In fact, when he was asked on the campaign trail about Project 2025, he said, I don't know anything about that. Who are those people? And yet he early on and quickly installed a key architect of Project 2025, Russ Vought, as the head of the Office of Management and Budget, which we know is the command and control center for the budget overseeing all federal agencies. And that's what Elon Musk is doing now. He's implementing Project 2025, the same Project 2025 that candidate Trump said he knew nothing about. And he said that because he knew it was unpopular. He knew it would be unpopular to take the financial cop off the beat. And I want to start by talking about what's happening over at CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, because that is the cop on the beat to go after fraudsters and scammers who cheat Americans out of their hard-earned money. And they have returned billions of dollars to our constituents, to the consumers who have been victims of these scams. And in doing so, they've earned some powerful enemies who want to shut them down. And Elon Musk is doing that dirty work on behalf of those fraudsters. And there's something especially twisted about the richest man in the world shutting down an agency that helps victims of scammers and fraudsters recover just a little bit of their hard-earned money. And I find it especially interesting that the new self-declared head of the CFPB, Russell Vought, told employees not to come into the office and essentially to stop work. Here's what he wrote, and I'm quoting, "Employees should not come into the office," unquote, and stand down from performing any work task, unquote. So this is an interesting situation. Federal employees continue to get paid, but the Trump administration tells them to stop doing their work. That apparently is what the Trump administration thinks is a good deal for the American taxpayer, to pay employees to not to do their job. So, Mr. Chairman, I have a simple question for you. Is that a practice that you pursue at the Fed, to pay your employees but tell them not to come to work? Have you done that?
No.
That wouldn't be very efficient, would it?
No.
No, it wouldn't. And yet, that's what the so-called Doge boys, efficiency boys, are doing. In addition to that, they're rummaging through the private, very personal, sensitive information of Americans at the Department of Treasury. So it seems to me that the Trump administration and Elon Musk are focused on everything except what Donald Trump said he was going to focus on during the campaign, which was to bring prices down. And when you look at the price of eggs these days, I noticed that Waffle House just instituted a new 50-cent per egg surcharge due to the nationwide rise in the cost of eggs. They said that's going to be a new surcharge, and other restaurants are following suit. You've seen that, right, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah. And at the same time, the Trump administration has restricted federal agencies from providing the public with information about the bird flu, avian flu, which is part of the cost of egg increases. So what we're really facing here is an administration that campaigned on bringing down prices and is not doing that, did not campaign on Project 2025, and that's what they're doing. But when it comes to prices, Mr. Chairman, the president's also talking about significant increases in tariffs. Our Republican colleagues are also talking about passing a tax bill that gives way disproportionately to the super wealthy, and which will add trillions to the deficit by their own account. They're talking about playing around with the baseline. So my question to you is simple. All things being equal, do big increases in tariffs and increasing the deficit and debt put upward pressure on inflation? Isn't that simple math?
You know, it really does remain to be seen what tariff policies will be implemented, and I just think it would be unwise to speculate when we really don't know. I mean, we see proposals, but it's so hard to say what's going to happen. And
Well, last time the Trump administration was in office, the Fed took actions because they were concerned about the impact of increasing tariffs. Isn't that the case?
we wound up cutting rates in 2000 and I guess it was 19,
Right.
but it really was because growth slowed and confidence was weak and the global economy was weakening. So the net effect of all that's what we look at. And it's really not just tariffs. It's tariffs, immigration, fiscal policy, and regulatory policy. And those will all go into a mix, and we'll try to make sense of it and do what's right for monetary policy.
If you could just get back to me, I'm not on the question of increasing the deficit by trillions of dollars and what impact you believe that has on inflation and prices. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Senator Lummis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Chairman Powell, for being with us today. I think you're aware of what direction my questions will take. They will be focused on the bank supervision function of the Fed. And I'd point out that when you and I were toddlers, 1956, the chairman of the Fed at the time, William McChesney Martin, said that the Federal Reserve Board is an agency of the Congress. Ben Bernanke said something similar in 2013 when he told Janet Yellen that, quote, Congress is our boss. Do you agree with that statement?
Yes, the way I always say it is that our supervision, our accountability runs through the legislative branch, not through the executive branch, as it does in many other forms of government.
Thank you for that, because I wouldn't have guessed that that was going to be your response. The way that the Fed has behaved for the last 4 years in its relationship with the U.S. Congress is to thumb its nose at Congress. Your staff has repeatedly stymied information requests from this committee, notably made by myself, the chairman, the ranking member, Senator Tillis, former Senator Pat Toomey, and others. In my experience, the Fed is a black hole. It consumes information, but it never releases it. Your fellow governors have personally misled me on at least 2 occasions with respect to Wyoming and digital assets. And in recent federal court filings, former Senator Pat Toomey has accused your staff of lying to him while providing